manifests not merely in the outright denial of biological sex, but also in the redefinition of marriage, the divorce of conception from the sexual act, and all manner of utopian schemes geared toward radical egalitarianism. In other words, the leftists have an ideological agenda, and they are willing to exploit people who are in great distress just to achieve it. That is why it doesn't matter that gender ideology doesn't actually help people suffering from gender confusion. That's why it doesn't matter if gender ideology hurts those with gender confusion. All that matters for the left is the political agenda. Leftists from the time of the French Revolution through Stalinist Russia have famously remarked, "You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs." That cold aphorism can be called many things. It cannot be called compassionate. How about the constant fear-mongering? In 2016, Hillary Clinton described half of her countrymen as deplorable and irredeemable. Virtually every mainstream media outlet has described the president and his supporters as fascist. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and many other prominent leftist politicians, including presidential candidates, have described the president as fascist, as well as a racist and a bigot. Does anybody seriously believe that the president is the second coming of Adolf Hitler? Does anybody really believe that the United States is operating Nazi concentration camps, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggested? Of course not. Nobody with two brain cells to rub together believes that President Trump is Hitler. The state of Israel named an entire town after Donald Trump. If Trump is a Nazi, he is the least competent Nazi in all of history. Nobody seriously believes it. Leftists persist in their hysterical smears because they cynically believe that it will advance their political agenda. But this hysteria has consequences. A 2018 survey from Arizona State University found that a quarter of American college students suffered PTSD-like symptoms as a result of the 2016 election. Clinically significant levels of stress because their candidate lost and the other guy won. But after all, that does make sense, doesn't it? They had been told that America had elected a Nazi. If you really believe that your country had elected a Nazi, I bet you would be stressed out too. The students surveyed typify young Americans who are statistically the most stressed, the most depressed, the most suicidal generation in American history. Depression diagnoses in this country are up 33% in recent years. Among millennials, they're up a whopping 47%. According to the CDC, the suicide rate among white children and teens increased 70% from 2006 to 2016. And although black children and teens kill themselves at lower rates, the rate of increase over the same period for black children and teens was even higher, 77%. And the left isn't satisfied merely to convince impressionable, ignorant, and terrified young people that their political institutions are crumbling. They are now taking to telling them that the entire human race will be wiped out within a decade. AOC gives the world 12 years, give or take. Future former presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke says that we have just 10 years. The UK's Prince Charles says we have a mere 18 months before the planet is past the point of no return. 18 months, kids, come on. Go out and party. What are you doing here for? 18 months, he said, which is a much shorter time scale than his 2015 prediction that we had 35 years before we reached the tipping point. And it's even shorter than his 2009 prediction that our hopes of planetary salvation would vanish within 100 months, which means by 2017, which was 2 years ago, which means, I guess, we're good. Of course, there is no scientific basis for these doomsday scenarios. The worst predictions of climate doom suggest that the Earth may heat up 1 or 2 degrees over the next century. There is no evidence that this poses an existential threat to human life. There is very little evidence that this will inconvenience us at all. We will survive. But the left needs to rile up impressionable youths if they ever want to force their long-standing agenda down our throats. And it is a truly long-standing agenda. So they rebrand everything they've ever wanted as an environmental agenda. They somehow convince people that wealth redistribution and unconstitutional legislative bodies and even reparations for slavery somehow have something to do with the environment. Somehow that will stave off the climate apocalypse. They call it the Green New Deal. They whip vulnerable children into a life or death frenzy and tell them without any evidence that we're on the verge of a, quote, mass extinction event, which is then repeated on TV screens around the world from the platform of the United Nations. You can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. These leftist alarmists believe it is worth scaring the daylights out of people, young people in particular, if it gives them their political victories in the end. You might say such a strategy is politically prudent. You might even say that it's environmentally beneficial to lie to people about the true nature of the threat, and that way at least to spur them to some kind of lesser action. But what you can't say is that this cynical strategy is compassionate. It's not. It's cruel, and it preys on the most vulnerable people among us. The bottom of this strategy, at the very, very bottom of it, is a blithe disregard for the truth. The left smears its opponents as racial bigots, not because they think those attacks are true, but just because they're politically useful. Just this past year, CNN contributor Areva Martin accused radio host David Webb of racism, of exploiting his white privilege. Now, Areva Martin had apparently never Googled David Webb. I know David Webb. I can assure you he has never exploited his white privilege because David Webb is black. No matter. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. Just if it's politically useful. What's most corrosive is not even that leftists replace truth with falsehood. What's worse is that they don't care about the difference. That's not just lying, that's cynicism. It's the same cynicism that asks, what is truth? And so you see the denial of objective truth altogether, denied in favor of subjective perception, your truth and my truth. So everything becomes about language, everything becomes about the narrative. This is the definition of political correctness, manipulating language to deny reality. In the leftist fantasy world, David Webb can be an anti-black bigot, so long as enough people say so. Lewis Carroll explains this whole strategy in Alice in Wonderland. Alice is having a debate with Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. To which Alice replies, the question is whether you can make words mean so many different things. Humpty Dumpty knows better than that. He says, the question is which is to be master. That is all. The left would be master by perverting our discourse into nonsense and nothing. The right must combat these lies with the truth. The left tells us we must lie about sex, about history, and about the weather. Because the truth, they say, is cruel. Reality is cruel, they tell us, and fantasy is compassionate. This belief itself is the oldest lie in the world, and the left has been peddling it for a very long time. In one of the most famous lines in presidential history, John F. Kennedy summed it all up. He was quoting the socialist playwright George Bernard Shaw, and he said, some people see things that are and say why. I dream things that never were and say, why not? This is supposed to be very inspirational. This was repeated by countless leftist politicians up to today. What Kennedy did not mention is that Shaw wrote that line in a play called Back to Methuselah. Specifically, he wrote it in the mouth of the serpent tempting Eve in the Garden of Eden. You'd think he would have Googled it. They didn't have Google in the 60s, but crack a book open. Don't quote the devil. That's not good presidential politics. Those are the words of the devil. There is nothing compassionate about them. To be compassionate is to share in the sufferings of others. The left does not share in those sufferings. It exacerbates them. There is nothing compassionate about lies, and there is nothing hateful about the truth. To comfort is to strengthen. That's what the word means. We must always speak so-called uncomfortable truths in the face of the left's cruel lies. The truth is a great comfort, and the truth will set you free, which is why the left is so hell-bent on covering it up. Thank you very much.